So when you think of Switzerland, what comes to mind? Probably peace, right? Stability, neutrality, this calm little island in the middle of a Europe that's been historically pretty chaotic. But the story of how it got that way? Oh, it's anything but peaceful. It's a story that was forged in fire, rebellion, and even civil war.
And that's the big question we're tackling today. To really get modern Switzerland, we have to dig in and figure this out. How on earth did a collection of warring communities, divided by language, divided by religion, with a history steeped in some of Europe's bloodiest fights, manage to transform itself into the stable, peaceful nation we know?
And this really shows you that paradox perfectly. On one side, you've got the clean, simple Swiss flag, a symbol of neutrality that everyone around the world recognizes. And on the other, brutal medieval warfare. That was the Swiss reality for centuries. So to understand how we get from that chaotic battle to that peaceful flag, we have to start at the very beginning.
All right, so our story kicks off way back in the late Middle Ages with this desperate pact made by just a few small communities standing up against some of the mightiest powers in Europe. Look, the start of Switzerland wasn't some big, glorious national declaration. It was way more practical than that. It was a defense pact. In 1291, the Habsburg emperor died, and these three small rural alpine communities got really worried they were about to lose the freedoms they had. So they figured, hey, we're stronger together, and formed an alliance to watch each other's backs.
And you know what? That little pact turned out to be an amazing idea. Over the next couple of centuries, other towns and even powerful city-states like Zurich and Bern saw how well it was working and wanted in. The Confederacy just kept growing, not just in size, but in confidence and in military muscle. But this growth, it was earned the hard way, on the battlefield. This was not some gentle diplomatic process. The Swiss were fighting and winning against massive powers like the Habsburgs and the Duchy of Burgundy. They even came up with these incredible new infantry tactics that made them one of the most feared military forces in all of Europe. Their success on the battlefield led to a pretty unexpected major export: soldiers. Yep. For centuries, Swiss mercenaries were the special forces of Europe, the elite troops that kings and popes would hire for their toughest fights. And all that fighting brought a ton of wealth and political clout back home, and really cemented their reputation for being incredibly tough. Okay, so all of this leads up to a huge moment in 1648. After centuries of basically being independent because they'd fought for it, the Treaty of Westphalia comes along, ends the 30 Years' War, and officially recognizes Switzerland's legal independence from the Holy Roman Empire. They were finally, officially, their own masters. But just as one threat disappeared, a new one was brewing, this time from the inside. So with the outside enemies mostly taken care of, the Swiss did what so many others have done. They turned on each other. This next phase of their story is all about these deep, violent internal splits that nearly ripped the entire Confederacy apart for good. The big issue was the Protestant Reformation. The same movement that was turning Europe upside down just tore right through Switzerland. You had cantons like Zurich and Bern going all in on Protestantism, while others, like Lucerne and the original Forest cantons, stayed fiercely Catholic. And this wasn't just some friendly debate over theology, it exploded into a massive political and military crisis. And this split was deep. The Protestant areas and the Catholic areas weren't just neighbors with different opinions. They were bitter rivals. They fought actual wars against each other, multiple times. The Confederacy was basically paralyzed, split into two competing governments, one for each religion. All this internal fighting, well, it made them a target. In 1798, revolutionary France, led by Napoleon, saw this divided Switzerland and just invaded. They completely dismantled the old system and forced a new centralized government on them called the Helvetic Republic. And the Swiss absolutely hated it, this total loss of their local traditions and control. So after Napoleon is finally defeated, you'd hope for peace. Nope, those old tensions came roaring right back, and it all boiled over into one last decisive conflict. On one side, you had 7 conservative Catholic cantons. They formed their own separate alliance, the Sonderbund, because they wanted to fight back against the liberal, centralizing reforms being pushed by the Protestant majority government. And the war itself? It was over in a flash, less than a month. The federal army was bigger, better organized, and it just rolled over the Sonderbund forces. So the Civil War was over. But here's the real nail-biter. What do you do now? After centuries of fighting, ending in a civil war, how do you possibly unite a nation that's so violently divided against itself?
And this is where the story takes a fascinating turn. What happened next was, frankly, an act of political genius. Instead of crushing the defeated cantons, which would have just planted the seeds for the next war, the victorious liberals did something completely different. They invited them to help build something totally new.
The answer they came up with was the federal state. It was partly inspired by the United States, actually. And it was this brilliant compromise that finally solved that centuries-old problem of local identity versus national unity. They created a central government that was strong enough to handle national issues, but, and this was the absolute key, they made sure the cantons kept the power to run their own local affairs, their own culture, their own traditions. So here's the genius of how they balanced it. The new federal government took over the big stuff, the army, the currency, the national laws, the things that tie a country together. But the cantons kept control over things like schools and local police. The Constitution also guaranteed individual rights, and as one big concession, they expelled the Jesuit order, which was a huge sticking point. It was just this incredibly pragmatic, brilliant deal. And the result of all this? Think about it. Since that tiny civil war in 1847, there has not been a single armed conflict on Swiss soil. The 1848 Compromise didn't just end a war. It created a peace that has lasted because it gave everyone a real stake in the new country. So, with peace finally secured at home, Switzerland was free to unlock its true potential. This allowed it to navigate the absolute insanity of the 20th century and become the prosperous, neutral powerhouse we know today. With all that political drama finally in the rearview mirror, Switzerland could get down to business. And boy, did it ever. The last part of the 19th and 20th centuries saw what people call the Swiss miracle. Just this incredible explosion of industry, banking, and innovation that turned a pretty poor farming country into one of the richest nations on earth. This stability was their secret weapon for surviving the chaos of the world wars. Their policy was armed neutrality, which is a nice way of saying we're neutral, but don't even think about messing with us. They had this crazy plan called the Redo, where the entire army would retreat into a massive network of fortified bunkers deep in the Alps. It would have made invading them so ridiculously expensive and bloody that nobody ever dared to try. That powerful deterrent, plus their role as a center for banking and diplomacy, helped keep them safe and independent. And you can really see how this long, hard fight for independence has shaped the Swiss mindset. Get this, Switzerland didn't even join the United Nations until 2002. Yeah, 2002, decades after almost everyone else. It just goes to show how incredibly careful they are about giving up even a tiny bit of their sovereignty to any international group, a caution born from centuries of having to fight for it. Which, of course, brings us all the way to today. What the Swiss story really shows us is that peace isn't something that just happens. It's the result of a difficult, deliberate, and frankly brilliant compromise that was built right from the ashes of conflict. And the final question is, in our world today, which is getting more interconnected and more turbulent all the time, how long can that unique model last?